Okay, so our topic today is talking about uniting Canadians. Knowing that Canada is a multicultural society, how do we take all these different types of people, all these different cultures, and how do we pull it all together? And when we do so, can we actually make everyone happy is what we're going to try to investigate today. So to understand this issue, we first have to understand what this term means, what multiculturalism means. So let's try to clarify that. So three terms that I find a lot of people aren't quite sure what the difference is. Race, culture, and ethnicity. When we're talking about race, we're really talking about a categorization of people based on physical characteristics. So that's why a lot of people, first thing they talk about is color. It could be anything about physical features on their face, anything about size, whatever else. It's looking at physical things, things you can actually see, and using that to categorize people. Culture is separate from race. Culture is how humans act. It's our customs, our arts, our social institutions, our achievements, the actual people and what they do and how they act, and social groupings. Right? It's really the systems we create, and that's the culture. Ethnicity then is how we identify with our culture. So if you ask someone what culture you're part of, however they answer is their ethnicity. Okay, so that's the difference between those three terms, and what we're really talking about today is culture and the idea of multiculturalism. Okay, the idea that we have all these different ways of acting here in Canada, we have different types of people, they have different customs. How do we pull that all together and make everyone happy in Canada is what we're going to try to figure out. So we start with, where do we all come from? Most people know and would say Canada is a country of immigrants. But after World War II, we weren't actually all that accepting of immigrants. In 1950, we have the Department of Citizen and Immigration, and they actually gave preference to Britain, Ireland, France, and the U.S. when it comes to immigrants. What they're really still trying to do, and you might remember this from Socials 10, is that they're really trying to create this white Canada at the time. So in 1950, with kind of that conservative culture at the time, there was this, trying to bring Canada back to what it was before. Black people were excluded at the time too from immigrating to Canada. 1951, to encourage that conservatism in immigration, there's something called the Assisted Passage Loan Scheme. And what this was is they actually kind of loaned money to people from Europe to immigrate to Canada. And this was an interest-free loan, so it makes it easier for them to come to Canada. So definitely in the early post-war period, there was this favoring of Europeans to come here to Canada. In 1952, we have the Immigration Act, and this almost gives the power to Canada to pretty much deny anyone based on any reason they can come up with. So Canada had the power to define which nationalities could come into Canada. They had the power to define which ethnicities could come to Canada. They could say, based on a certain geographical area, you could or could not come into Canada. They could even say if you had a custom that they considered peculiar, that didn't match Canadian customs, they could deny you coming into Canada. Similar, as it says, their habits and modes of life, same thing. If you act in a way that we don't find fits in the Canadian culture, they could say you can't immigrate to Canada. They could even use climate as one of the issues. So if you come from a warmer area near the equator, for example, they could use the reasoning that you don't suit the climate of Canada to deny your immigration. And this was probably used mostly against black people, the one about the climate. Also, what they're looking for is the ability for you to be assimilated into Canadian culture. So if you're a person who is strong about your beliefs and it doesn't seem like you could become quote-unquote Canadian, they could deny you immigration. And so that's the power the Canadian government had in 1952 to limit immigration. When we take a look at this chart on the right here, if we find 1952, it's about here. So we don't find that even with this policy that things changed too much, but this policy was created at a time that you can see there's a spike in immigration. There's a quick rise in immigration. So maybe the effects of it you can see right after it as it starts to dip off. And that's about the same time we have the baby boom in Canada. In 1956, Canada creates pretty much a list of categories of preferred countries. So they actually created categories, and they'd put countries into these different categories. So you could be a preferred category or a not preferred category. And so that's where they would organize all the different countries. But things will start to change in the mid-50s. 1956, there's the Hungarian uprising, or in Hungary, they're pretty much going to revolt against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had controlled Hungary as one of their Iron Curtain states, but the people of Hungary start to fight back against that. And of course, Soviet Union won't let them go. They start fighting against the people. So thousands of people left Hungary. Canada accepted 37,000 refugees, kind of similar to what we have done today with Syria. This kind of starts this public demand to change the Immigration Act to make it less discriminatory, to make it allow for different types of people to come into Canada. So we see the effect of this all the way in 1967, so make sure you know this one. That's when we get the point system that we even currently use today to figure out who gets to come into Canada. This is during the Lester Pearson era. So what this point system does is it removes all limitations based on country of origin. So it doesn't matter what country you come from anymore. It doesn't matter what race you are anymore. What matters is kind of your ability to contribute to Canadian society. So the points are all based on skills that you have in the workplace, education, that kind of stuff. The points can be changed by the federal government. Usually it's about 70 points that we're aiming for. Currently, it's at 67 points. So if the country wants to try to slow down immigration because maybe our population has a natural increase or a high enough natural increase, what we might want to do is to raise that number, right, to discourage immigration. If we find that our natural increase is kind of low, what we could do is lower the number to encourage immigration. So right now, if we're at 67, it looks like we're trying to encourage a few more people to come to Canada, making it a little easier for people to come to Canada. 1976, they allow immigration based on family members. So if you're already a Canadian citizen and you have direct family elsewhere, it makes it easier for you to bring your extended family over. So here's a closer look at what this point system is. I doubt you'll be tested on this, but it's kind of just interesting to know, and you can kind of test yourself to see if you were outside of the country and you applied for immigration, would you actually get in? So education is one of the first things. There's a maximum of 25 points awarded for education. If you have a PhD or a master's degree, you get 25 points. If you have a high school degree, you get 5 points. You guys don't have a high school degree, so you'd be at 0. Work experience can also get you points, but this is skilled work experience, so you have to have some sort of training in a specific skill, and then you'd be applying that skill in your job. If you've been applying that skill for 1 year, you can get 15 points. Up to 4 years, you can get a possibility of 21 points. So most of you guys, since you're still in high school, you haven't learned a specific skill to be applied in the workplace, so probably still at 0. Age also gets you a certain number of points. Between 21 to 49, you get 10 points. 16 and under, you get 0 points. 54 and under, 54 and over, you get 0 points. If you're between 16 and 21, you get kind of 2 points for each year. So if you're 20, for example, you get 8 points. So it kind of gets less and less until it gets to 0. If you're 19, you get 6 points, and then so by the time you get to 16, it's 0 points. Same thing as between 49 and 54. If you're 50 years old, you get 8 points, and then it shrinks all the way to 0 points by the time you get to 54. The reason being is, remember, this is all based on whether or not you can contribute to Canadian society. People who are aged 21 to 49 are probably the most capable of working, so they get more points. People who are under 16 and over 54 are like dependents. So if they came to Canada, they'd probably be using our social security system. Anyone who's under 16 will be getting education. 54 and over might be accessing hospital, that kind of stuff, or medical care, sorry. Your language skills also get you a certain amount of points. You guys probably all have English as your first language, so you get 16 points for that. If French is your second language, you get 8 points for that. It could be flipped around too. If French is your first language, you can get 16 points for that. English as your second, 8 points for that. Having a valid job offer could also get you 10 points. So that has to be set up before you come to Canada. There's a section in the application called adaptability. And when I looked over all those questions, it's all about the spouse you would bring over. So you can get up to a maximum of 10 points for the suitability of your spouse. And then pretty much ask the same questions about your spouse in terms of their education, work experience, and age, right? So that's for the head of family, bringing that family over, immigrating, and so just asking about your spouse that you're bringing over as well. There's also other things that they can consider for your immigration currently. Proof of funds. If you have no money at all and you're coming into Canada, they would then expect that you might have to kind of take from our social security system. So if you had no funds and you're coming to Canada, they could deny you your immigration. Criminal offenses could also void your application. It doesn't matter if you had 100 points, for example, but you have a criminal offense. If it's considered a criminal offense in Canada, they won't let you immigrate to Canada. So if you total that all up with all the maximum points, it's actually a maximum of 100. So like I said already, usually it's about 70 or so, give or take, and it depends on whether or not Canada needs to bring more people in or kind of slow down its population growth. So chances are, if you kind of kept score for yourself, you probably, on your own, you probably won't be let into Canada. So you can see after 1967, so that's about here, when they created this point system, if anything, immigration started to decrease. And then, of course, Canada now has the control, or the government now has the control to change that point system to pretty much regulate our immigration. In 1971, during the Trudeau era, he creates a multiculturalism policy. That actually becomes an act in 1988. It becomes a law. So we'll quickly just take a look at that. You won't have to memorize what's in the law, but essentially what it does, it says that Canada is supposed to be multicultural. It accepts all cultures. You can read through all this if you want. You'd have to look it up. So you just look up Multiculturalism Policy of Canada. So it's actually entrenched in our law, what this is. So legally, Canada is multicultural. So to be multicultural, we actually have a portfolio in the federal government for multiculturalism. So there's a Department of Multiculturalism and Citizenship that was created in 1988 with this act. That changed, and it changed to be part of the Canadian Heritage Ministry. James Moore, who used to be POCO's MP, was in charge of Canadian Heritage when he was an MP, for at least a while when he was MP. I think that was the last ministry that he was in charge of. Okay, so that ends part 1.